China, but also other countries are also seeing Indo-Pacific as very important for economic and demographic reasons. China is still not happy you're calling it Indo-Pacific, still calls it Asia-Pacific. South China Sea is as much as a microcosm of everything China wants to achieve at the global level. NineDash Line ideally has no legal historical presence. It does not, it is an arbitrary, these are 9 arbitrary dashes which China has put up for various reasons. China is a country who takes prestige issue very seriously. For them, Taiwan is a prestige issue. But I think in our own ways, India will continue to support Taiwan because Taiwan for us is also an important party for our semiconductor industry, for our own economic prosperity. Chinese Navy is actually making their ingress to Indian Ocean waters, and now the political leadership has changed the stance.
Hello, welcome back to India Today Global. The Indo-Pacific, South China Sea, China, India, these are countries and concepts that we've been talking about a lot on India Today Global, and increasingly things that you'll find being talked about in the global sphere. The Indo-Pacific, of course, has emerged as one of the most important strategic theaters for any country in the world today. But what does it really mean? What is the South China Sea crisis? What exactly is happening with the Taiwan states? Things that you've thought about a lot and may have wanted explained, but today we're going to sit down with someone who's literally written the book on a lot of these subjects, Dr. Pooja Bhatt, who is an associate professor at Jindal University, someone who has written on these issues for a very, very long time. Dr. Bhatt, thank you so much for joining us. Could I begin by asking you a little bit about the Indo-Pacific, the South China Sea? These are terms that are thrown around a lot. Could you begin by just sort of explaining to us where this term began? You know, Indians of a particular generation, people of a particular generation will say, okay, we used to say Asia-Pacific, we used to say this and that, we used to talk about East Asia, now we're talking about one Indo-Pacific. What does it mean exactly? Why did this usage and terminology come in? What does it mean?
Thank you, Shashank, for asking that question. And I'm very happy that we are starting with Indo-Pacific and how the concept came into the picture. Though it was a very geostrategic concept in terms of, you know, how we wanted to define the maritime oceans of the region. The entire focus from land to maritime actually shifted for 2-3 reasons. First was economic, because the borders were our borders are very volatile within the Asia, and it becomes very easy for countries to travel through, for trade purposes, to travel through waters. And one of the first initiations was the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Since 2013, when China actually started, you know, approaching the region by building ports, by building trade, the region basically became very sensitive about how they want to approach the maritime domain. Not only China, but also other countries are also seeing Indo-Pacific as very important for economic and demographic reason, because we are also very underdeveloped and developing region. The youth of this country, the 60% of youth of this country is below the age of 35. That makes it very important as a region for production, for development, for consumption. So these are the figures, these are factors why most of the countries, if you see, and when they talk about European countries and other extra-regional countries who want to be involved in the Pacific, they've given these reasons to be in the region. So the economic reasons is the first reason why we are listening about Indo-Pacific about so much. Second reason is about the strategic presence of countries. A lot of countries like France, UK, and US have their certain territories in the region, and now seeing Chinese aggressiveness in the South China Sea and Indian Ocean region, all these countries want to remain a part of this region. And this is very important for them to keep a hold on these territories by one or the other means, you know, make their presence. And that's second defense-related strategic reason of the thing. Third reason is, of course, political, because now we have also seen countries like India and other East Asian countries now are developing at a faster pace. now these countries also want a global presence through Indo. And they now know, because being a middle power country also give them this position to reshape the region, rewrite the rules of the region, and that's why for all these reasons we are seeing Indo-Pacific being so talked about at the moment, and we can discuss about all.
Sure, no, absolutely. And could I ask you a little bit about when we've heard this being talked about? Of course, the Japanese, I think, first sort of posited the concept a great deal, talking about the Indo-Pacific. Could you tell us a little bit about how China sort of fitted into this entire thing? Increasingly, the conversation was that the idea of the Indo-Pacific, the idea of this one comprehensive strategic theater, really came out because of the rise of China and things like that. Also conversations about rising Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific, which will, I'm sure, also lead us to conversations about the South China Sea. So could I ask you to explain that part of the equation, right? What changed in terms of, we used to call it Asia-Pacific, now it's Indo-Pacific. How does China fit into that? How does the rise of China generally fit into this whole idea of the Indo-Pacific?
So China is still not happy you're calling it Indo-Pacific, still calls it Asia-Pacific. So as you correctly mentioned, that it was Shinzo Abe in 2007 when he came to New Delhi, and he gave this very famous Confluence of the Seas speech in the Indian Parliament, and he mentioned the concept of how these two seas and the countries of these seas can come together. Remember, 2007-8 was also the time we were going through economic crisis globally. So his basic idea was to connect the economies of these countries through maritime domain, because he thought when land borders are not providing for it, we might as well look at the maritime borders, the connectivity for trade, for development of human being. So that was his idea. It was not a defense or security kind of idea that he had proposed. It was a very strategic, economic based, human development based idea that he had proposed 2007-8. That idea actually led forward during tsunami. When we had
the 2004 Indian Ocean
tsunami, and when the countries came together for the first time in a way of HADR for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, the 4 countries of Quad came. Now we call them Quad of US, Australia, Japan, and India came together in very short notice to collaborate and save people. World realized actually navies in these countries can come together for these reasons also. And I think suddenly the idea of collaboration from just being economics, it also shifted to security. That not only we can collaborate on the economic reason, we can also collaborate on the security. At the same time, we had the background of Chinese aggressiveness going on. So everything actually at the same time were coming up together, and this is what we see right now.
Now I might recall that one of the big movements that sometimes talked about as this movement that also gave rise to the Indo-Pacific, sort of woke countries up to China, was I think in a 2010 ASEAN meeting when the Chinese foreign minister said China is a big country and it's surrounded by a bunch of small countries and everyone is just going to have to accept that. That was seen as a very aggressive statement by the Chinese foreign minister, and that was seen as a fundamental break between the time that came before and the time that came after. But could I ask you also to talk a little bit about something that people have been hearing about a lot, is the South China Sea. Why is this so important? It's talked about a lot, not so much in India, but of course, because of Taiwan, because of China, because of the NineDash Line, which of course I may spoil and talked about, has written a book about it. Could I ask you to talk about that? South China Sea, why does it matter? Could you also explain why it matters to India, perhaps?
So I will go back to when it didn't matter to India. Okay, the times. Why South China Sea is important for China, and we'll talk about it first. Basically, South China Sea is as much as a microcosm of everything China wants to achieve at the global level. It wants to become a global power, and for that, it has to first secure its background, right? And South China Sea provides that kind of background. It provides a buffer that China has never got. China has always been attacked both from the land as well as the seas, right? And after the 1800 definition, if you've heard about century of humiliation, when the British attacked China and China felt this incident of intense humiliation for Chinese folk. Since then, China realized that we need to cover up our, maritime background so that we remain secure, and that was the first objective. Second, they realize that the resources which are available in the South China Sea, it's as good as second Persian Gulf in terms of oil and gas resources. And if you remember, since 1993, China has been oil importer. So if China gets the oil resources which are available there, China is no more dependent on oil.
Sure.
Third is the minerals and other energy resources. China wants to become a superconductor industry. For that, they need minerals and resources, which are again available there.
Right.
These are few reasons. And also, China understands that this is an area which is also, once upon a time, very important for fisheries.
Right.
And fisheries is a major diet within Chinese community. Right? Fish. But this is also a very important diet for the locals of the surrounding South China Sea littorals. Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, all other communities which are based on fishing. Now this is where the tussle starts. So I want to talk about from 1970s when China realized that to get the oil and energy and fisheries and everything, it needs that kind of presence in South China Sea waters. And it started its fisheries presence in the waters and even started attacking fishermen from Philippines and Vietnam. During that time, Philippines went to the Permanent Court of Arbitration to complain against China, and that's where the entire story started. And China, despite being an UNCLOS member, United Nations of Convention on Law of the Seas, China said, I don't want to be party of the member because I have not done anything wrong. And despite that, Philippines went ahead for the case and won the case in 2016. And that moment when you realize that Philippines has won a case against, China and won the entire area for itself. Second day, the next month, you have President Duterte going to he's going to China to for the bonhomie with Chinese. So it was a complete reversal of what expected. So this is how the entire game started. That despite countries winning the case against China, were not willing to take it up because China was also economic partner for these countries. So South China Sea is actually, if you see, is microcosm of all lot of things, military issues that we are seeing. China wants its presence because you have a US presence in the Guam and Japan, in Vietnam, in Philippines. So for China, it is also very important to remain present militarily to avoid American access to those areas. So economically, strategically, historically, it makes a lot of sense for China to remain present in the South China Sea waters and maintain its dominance over there. That's the first part of it. Now, for the longest time, India was not very bothered about South China Sea because it's not very close. Our primary area of concern is Indian Ocean waters. But in the recent years, we have also seen increasing trade of India's increasing trade, which is as much as 55-60% of Indian trade passing through the South China Sea waters. Because from Indian Ocean to Pacific Ocean, the shortest area from Malacca, Sunda and Lombok Straits, which are in the Southeast Asia, is through South China Sea. To do that, you need to have the security of SLOCs. SLOCs are sea line of communications, where your merchant shipping passes and you have to protect them from piracy and other kind of activities. So India realized that if we want our trade to be secure, and if majority of our trade is passing through that region, we need security of that trade. And for that, we need a military presence. And that is why in the last few years, we have seen many Indian engagements in the Southeast Asian countries, militarily, diplomatically. We are doing a lot more exercise in the region. We never had a formal statement on South China Sea for the longest time. New Delhi never made a statement. But if you see in the past few years, every time a Filipino official is in India, or Indian high official is in Philippines, we make it a point to make a statement on India's support for South China Sea, Philippines' stance on South China Sea. So this is how we have evolved in our position.
So I can ask you to explain one concept that has come up a lot, the Nine-Dash Lines. Very briefly, it's this idea of a very expansive Chinese territorial claim, which is really how over a decade ago, the South China Sea really burst onto everyone's radar as something that we're going to have to watch as a flashpoint. So could I ask you to explain that concept? What exactly does it mean?
Correct. So Nine-Dash Line ideally has no legal historical presence. It does not. It is an arbitrary. These are 9 arbitrary dashes which China has put up for various reasons, and I'll explain how. 9-dash line came into existence at the global glossary and sometime in 2013 when the Philippines-China case was going on, and China all of a sudden presents this map in front of UNCLOS that we hold the entire area as our own. This is our map, and these are 9 dashes, and that means the entire waters of South China Sea, and at least 80% of it under 9-dash line are ours. Now, when UNCLOS went ahead to ask that what are the reasons behind this, they go back to a 1949 map. And according to that 1949 map, and if you remember, that time China was basically ruled by Kuomintang government. So that government, nobody's even sure that this map is actually valid or not, right? This can be just produced a day before. This map comes up, a 1949 map, and they say, see, since 1949 map, we have been having 9 dashes here all over the area. And based on this, we can continue to hold these waters. The problem with this is there are no geographical coordinates of these dashes. You can't place them that, okay, this is a geographical coordinate. They are not continuous. They are not connected. Like otherwise borders are connected, right? The lines are connected. They are just dashes. China could never explain what are the reasons behind these dashes. Why only dashes? Why not a complete line? So these are some questions which came. And if you remember, till 1953, there were 11 dashes. One was near Vietnam, right? When China and Vietnam had their, both the governments got together. They said we'll remove one of the maps next to the Vietnam. And last year we had one more dash added next to Taiwan. So now it's a 10-dash line. The importance of this entire region is because if area-wise, if you see, the area of complete land area of China is around 3.7 million square kilometer. And the area of this region would be 3.5 million square kilometer. So it is as much as a big China in the maritime domain. And to compare it with India, India's area is 3.2 million square kilometer. So you can imagine the kind of water mass China is holding in the maritime domain.
Understood. Right. So China, of course, trying to make large claims. Of course, we've seen them take on more territory, actually build islands in these parts of the South China Sea. So that has, of course, got a lot of attention. You might have seen visuals on your screens about the Philippines and the Chinese coast guards regularly clashing because of these claims. So it's evoked a lot of hostility towards China in this part of the world, of course. And if India has such important relationships with these countries, it also has an interest here. But I'll come back to the Indian side of the equation a little bit, because you mentioned Taiwan. And Taiwan is a country that, as a journalist, I can tell you that we did not track until just a couple of years ago. It was really, I think, around October 2020, 2021 that it really burst onto the mindset for Indians as well. Indians started thinking about what is going on in Taiwan. So could you, in a very Spark Notes version, tell us a little bit about why Taiwan is on everyone's headlines these days? What exactly we're talking about when it comes to the Taiwan-China conflict? Are we likely to see military conflict? Could you just give us a bit of an explanation on that?
So the problem with Taiwan is the legacy of Xi Jinping. The entire legacy of third term of Xi Jinping was that I will reunify Taiwan with mainland China. And I think that is the promise he's trying to keep in this present times. We wouldn't have seen this kind of, aggression in this area had it not been Xi Jinping's own commitment to it. Because for Chinese domestic public, reunification matters a lot. And he won the entire third term of presidential election, Xi Jinping, based on this commitment that I will reunify. And now when the next elections are coming up in the next 2 years, Xi Jinping has to keep up these promises. So this is very highly doubtful that whether China will be overtaking Taiwan completely in terms of military takeover. But this is very much possible that a political kind of takeover or some territorial takeover, like we hear about Matsu Island. All these islands can be taken over just to make up, kind of note to these domestic public that, see, I promised you Taiwan in my third term that we'll reunify. And it's a very historical, very issue prestige. Remember, China is a country who takes prestige issue very seriously. For them, Taiwan is a prestige issue. And that's why we'll keep seeing this issue of Taiwan Strait crisis flaring up every now and then till the next elections come up.
There's been a lot of conversation and some reporting as well that India is considering what might happen in case of a contingency over Taiwan. You've had very senior admirals, at least from the United States, talk about how there could be a Chinese attack on Taiwan. That is one of the big key strategic questions. And arising from that is, will India do something about it? Or would it be interested in doing something about this? We know that the American government has, of course, raised this concern with India as well, in terms of what India's interest in this situation. But we've seen India make some statements on Taiwan as well, something that you did not see a little while ago. So could I ask you a little bit about how you see India's policy on this question evolve of Taiwan, potential for military conflict? What is India thinking on this?
I think for how US sees Taiwan is different from how India sees. For US, it's a commitment to the region, for its allies in the region, including Philippines and Taiwan. It has to remain present in the region. So for them, every time the Taiwan issue flares up, they have to show that kind of commitment that we'll be militarily present for you for their own stakes. For India, it's a different case. For now, India has always accepted the one China principle. So for India to count Taiwan separate, at least overtly, is quite difficult. India has never made that kind of. India has always made a cause of the statement that we agree that whatever China is doing aggressive, but we will never say otherwise that we will want to come in military picture. So for India, I do not see that we would want to be a part of any military aggressiveness when it comes to Taiwan Strait. We will not be a part of any political kind of agenda making over there. But I think in our own ways, India will continue to support Taiwan, because Taiwan for us is also an important party for our semiconductor industry, for our own economic prosperity. I think India will play whatever its equation with Taiwan would be 101 rather than seeing it at a regional level. So for a scholar like myself, I do not see India getting engaged in any military kind of engagement.
So if I could then close this conversation by asking you a little bit about India's policy. You of course wrote helped in writing a book on India's Navy and how it's responded over the last 10, 12 years to this rise of China. Could I ask you, how did the thinking in the Indian sort of Navy and in the Indian military really evolve around what needs to be done on this question of China? China was never usually seen as a power in the Indian Ocean, generally kept to its side. But what we've seen over the last couple of decades is that China's military power, its ability to send its ships and its military to other parts of the world, has increased a lot, which means they've also come into the Indian Ocean. So how has the Indian military changed its view on China? What are we doing to counter China, as it were?
I think we have not changed our vision. Indian Navy has not changed their vision on China or a statement on China. But I think it's only solidified over years. Now, what Indian Navy used to always tell, that there are huge chances of Chinese Navy seeing their kind of development, that they might come to Indian Ocean waters. And Indian Navy has been always telling this to Indian political leadership, which was never heard before. But they were never taken seriously. Now we are seeing Chinese Navy is actually making their ingress to Indian Ocean waters, and now the political leadership has changed the stance. Political leadership has actually given that kind of backing to Indian Navy to build up infrastructure. Now Indian Navy has the largest budget increment in the last few years. We compare the defense budget of our Indian Navy. That has allowed Indian Navy to achieve what was not there before. They did not have the infrastructure. They did not have the ships and the wherewithal, the weapons, the instruments of fighting, the kind of military engagements. The kind of military engagement in the past few years that we have seen, Indian Navy making rounds, making port calls to countries all over the world, was something not seen before. Right? So I think it was a political leadership's push which actually helped Indian Navy. Indian Navy is always aware what China is doing, and there are chances that they will come into Indian Ocean waters. But now times have changed, and it's a political leader's backing which has helped Indian Navy's cause in terms of development.
Right. Could I ask you a little bit about, we've seen a lot about arms sales from India. India's arms exports to around the world have increased a great deal. There was a sale of the BrahMos missiles to the Philippines, some conversations with Indonesia on that same front. Vietnam, we've given them, patrol boats and so on. So could I ask you a little bit about where exactly is this coming from? Like helping these Southeast Asian countries. Some, of course, will say that look, it's a good business case. We want our companies to sell more goods abroad. But the others also saying that, of course, the idea is that we want countries that are on the maritime periphery of China to have the defense capability they need to ensure stability in that part of the world. Could I ask you to explain what exactly is going on?
There are 2-3 reasons for why we are seeing this increasing defense budget. First of all, most of these defense equipments are very expensive. The traditional sellers of it, like European sellers and American sellers, most of these equipments come very expensive. For countries like in Southeast Asia, which are basically developing economies, they are spending as much as 2 to 3% in their defense of their GDP for the defense purchases. So they wanted a cheaper alternative. It is also coming at a time when India is trying to develop its Atmanirbharta program. So we are developing certain products and equipments for our own use. Might as well we can sell it out. So it makes a win-win situation. And also it helps these countries, the Southeast Asian countries, come out of from Chinese influence. Basically, they want products which are not coming from China, which are not made in China, but they are not super expensive, and they can use it for protecting themselves. I think these all things fall in place when these countries buy their products from India.
Right. Could I ask you one final question? And I know I said that twice, but I'll say this one last time and ask you very specifically on this question of the Indian Navy that you have worked on specifically. We've been talking about ocean, so it's fitting that I end with this question about the Navy, which is there have been lots of conversations about how India wants to expand the size of its Navy. China, of course, is expanding its naval size at record speeds. But India's Navy, because of budgetary constraints and so on, has not been able to expand at the rate that it wanted to. We set some targets of, I think, a 225 ship Navy that the naval chiefs in the past have said will not be met. So what does that mean for us? That if the Navy is not able to expand at the rate that it wants to, while a power like China is putting out ships at rates that has the whole world somewhat concerned, how does that work for India? What exactly does India need to do then?
That's actually concerning, because the initial figure of 275, then downing it to 250, then 240, I think it is working against India's own favor. A country that wants to become a blue economy, right? By 2030, India is inspiring to become a blue economy, and to protect your blue economy, you need a blue water navy. Blue water navy is supposed to go to your high seas, sustain themselves in high seas. So if you don't have your ships, your vessels that can sustain themselves on seas for the higher amount of time, they can do rotations on a very a long-term basis. You can't have a blue water navy. And that is why when you're talking about that reduction of these numbers, is a concerning factor for Indian Navy. That on one hand, we are seeing Chinese naval forces, which are, maybe shipping out one ship every month. I think 2 submarines every year or something. Compared to that, our programs are just lying dead. We are not going ahead with our program. So this is definitely a very concerning times for India, where we are not putting up our efforts. But at the same time, there are certain efforts going on to develop these shipbuildings in-house. We want our Indian shipbuilders to do the shipbuilding. We don't want, because presently the biggest shipbuilders in the world are Korea, Japan, and China. And if we want to build our ships, we need to build them indigenously. And these are the programs which are long term. We cannot churn out ships like China does, because they have invested 50 years behind it. I think we again need to invest at least 20 to 30 years to get the number that we are seeking.
Understood.
It's a long-term game.
Right. Dr. Pooja Bhatt joining us here, talking to us about a whole range of things: the Indo-Pacific, the South China Sea, Taiwan, and also India's own strategic ambitions in this region, as well as the Indian Navy's plans for expansion. Dr. Bhatt, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for watching India Today Global.